Hello, my name's Carla. I'm going to be reading aloud the Ringing Cedars of Russia series by Vladimir Megré. And to preface, I would like to say that these books are translated from Russian to English. So there are many Russian words and names and places. And so I would like to ask in advance for your forgiveness for any mispronunciations that can and probably will happen. And I'd also like to note that I'm not sure if it's the author's style of writing or if it's the awkward translations themselves, but a lot of these passages can be somewhat cumbersome. I find them to be that way anyhow. But the information and the story therein are very much worth the effort. So, without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Book 1, Anastasia, Chapter 1, The Ringing Cedar. In the spring of 1994, I chartered 3 riverboats, on which I carried out a 3-month expedition on the River Ob in Siberia, from Novosibirsk to Sailkard and back. The aim of the expedition was to foster economic ties with the regions of the Russian far north. The expedition went under the name of the Merchant Convoy. The largest of the 3 riverboats was a passenger ship named the Patrice Lumumba. Western Siberian riverboats bear rather interesting names: the Maria Ulyanova, the Patrice Lumumba, and the Mikhail Kalinin, as if there were no other personages in history worth commemorating. The lead ship, Patrice Lumumba, housed the expedition headquarters, along with the store where local Siberian entrepreneurs could exhibit their wares. The plan was for the convoy to travel north 3,500 kilometers, visiting not only major ports of call such as Tomsk, Nizhnevartovsk, Khanty-Mansiysk, and Sailkard, but smaller places as well, where goods could be unloaded only during a brief summer navigation season. The convoy would dock at a populated settlement during the daytime. We would offer the wares we had brought for sale and hold talks about setting up regular economic links. Our traveling was usually done at night. If weather conditions were unfavorable for navigation, the lead ship would put into the nearest port and we would organize on board parties for the local young people. Most places offered little in ways of their own entertainment. Clubs and community centers, so-called houses of culture, had been going downhill ever since the collapse of the USSR, and there were almost no cultural activities available. Sometimes we might go for 24 hours or more without seeing a single populated place, even the tiniest village. From the river, the only transportation artery for many kilometers around, the only thing visible to the eye was the taiga itself. Footnote: taiga, the Russian name given to the boreal forest that stretches across much of Siberia and northern Canada. The word Siberia is derived from an Old Tungus word, severe, meaning land, world, or tribe. I was not yet aware at the time that somewhere amidst the uninhabited vastness of forest along the riverbank, a surprise meeting was awaiting me, one that was to change my entire life. One day, on our way back to Novosibirsk, I arranged to dock the lead ship at a small village, one with only a few houses at best, some 30 or 40 kilometers distant from the largest population centers. I planned a 3-hour stopover so the crew could have shore leave and the local residents could buy some of our goods and foodstuffs, and we could cheaply pick up from them fish and wild-growing plants of the taiga. During our stopover time, as the leader of the expedition, I was approached by two of the local senior citizens I judged at the time. One of them appeared to be somewhat older than the other. The elder of the two, a wizened fellow with a long gray beard, kept silent the entire time, leaving his younger companion to do the talking. This fellow tried to persuade me to lend him 50 of my crew, which numbered no more than 65 in total, to go with them into the taiga, about 25 kilometers or so from the dock where the ship was berthed. They would be taken into the depths of the taiga to cut down a tree he described as a ringing cedar. Footnote: cedar, in this case and throughout the book, referring to either the Siberian pine or to the Lebanese cedar. The cedar, which he said reached 40 meters in height, 40 meters, about 131 feet, needed to be cut up into pieces which could be carried by hand to the ship. We must, he said, definitely take the whole lot. The old fellow further recommended that each piece be cut up into smaller pieces. Each of us should keep one for himself and give the rest to relatives, friends, and anyone who wished to accept the piece as a gift. He said this was a most unusual cedar. The piece should be worn on one's chest as a pendant. Hang it around your neck while standing barefoot in the grass, and then press it to your chest with the palm of your left hand. It takes only a moment to feel the pleasing warmth emanating from the piece of cedar, followed by a light, tingling sensation running throughout the whole body. From time to time, whenever desired, the side of the pendant facing away from the body should be rubbed with one's fingers, the thumbs pressed against the other side. The old fellow confidently assured me that within 3 months, the possessor of one of these ringing cedar pendants would feel significant improvements in his sense of well-being and will be cured of many diseases. Even AIDS? I asked, and briefly explained what I had learnt about this disease from the press. The oldster confidently replied, from any and all diseases. But this, he considered, was an easy task. The main benefit was that anyone having one of these pendants would become kinder, more successful, and more talented. I did know a little about the healing properties of the cedars of our Siberian taiga, but the suggestion that it could affect one's feelings and abilities, well, that to me seemed beyond the bounds of probability. The thought came to me that maybe these old men wanted money from me for this unusual cedar, as they themselves called it, and I began explaining that out in the big wide world, women were used to wearing new jewelry made of gold and silver and wouldn't pay a dime for some scrap of wood. And so I wasn't going to lay out any money for anything like that. They don't know what they're wearing, came the reply. Gold? Well, that's dust in comparison with one piece of this cedar. And we don't need any money for it. We can give you some dried mushrooms in addition, but there's nothing that we need from you. Not wanting to start an argument, out of respect for their age, I said, well, maybe someone will wear some of your cedar pendants. They certainly would if a top wood carving craftsman agreed to put his hand to it and create something of amazing beauty. To which the old fellow replied, yes, you could carve it, but it would be better to polish it by rubbing. It will be a lot better if you do this yourself, with your own fingers, whenever your heart desires. Then the cedar will also have a beautiful look to it. Then the younger of the two quickly unbuttoned his old worn jacket and then his shirt, and revealed what he was wearing on his chest. I looked and saw a puffed out circle, or oval. It was multicolored, purple, raspberry, auburn, forming some kind of puzzling design. The vein lines on the wood looked similar to little streams. I am not a connoisseur of objects of art, although from time to time I have had an occasion to visit picture galleries. The world's great masters had not called forth any particular emotions in me, but the object hanging around this man's neck aroused significantly greater feelings and emotions than any of my visits to the Tretyakov Gallery. Footnote: the foremost collection of Russian art in all the world, located at the center of Moscow. How many years have you been rubbing this piece of cedar? I asked. 93, the old fellow responded. And how old are you? 119. At the time, I didn't believe him. He looked like a man of maybe 75. Either he hadn't noticed my doubts, or if he had, he paid no attention to them. In somewhat excited tones, he started in trying to persuade me that any piece of this cedar, polished by human fingers alone, would also look beautiful in just 3 years. Then it would start looking even better and better, especially when worn by a woman. The body of its wearer would give off a pleasant and beneficial aroma, quite unlike anything artificially produced by man. Indeed, a very pleasant fragrance was emitting from both of these old men. I could feel it, even though I'm a smoker and, like all smokers, have a dulled sense of smell. And there was only one other peculiarity. I suddenly became aware of phrases in the speech of these strangers that were not common to the residents of this isolated part of the north. Some of them I remember to this day, even the intonations associated with them. Here is what the old fellow told me. God created the cedar to store cosmic energy. When somebody is in a state of love, they emit a radiant energy. It takes but a second for it to reflect off the celestial bodies floating overhead and then come back down to earth and give life to everything that breathes. The sun is one of those celestial bodies, and it reflects but a tiny fraction of such radiance. Only bright rays can travel into space from man. On the earth. I assumed there would be a footnote, but there isn't, so I'm going to go to the translator's preface and read this. The question that entails the most serious difficulty, however, one that formed the subject of several dozen emails between publisher and translator before it was finally resolved, was the rendering into English of the Russian word "человек." It is the common term used to denote a person or a human being, the equivalent of German Mensch, I guess that's how you pronounce it, as well as the English man. In the familiar Bible verse, God created man in his own image. The problem with the term human, as in human being, is that it not only suggests a formation of the species from matter or earth, compare humus, H-U-M-U-S, the organic constituent of soil, but it is associated with lowly concepts. From humus comes words like humble, humility, etc. Whereas человек is derived from the old Russian words indicating thinking, shelo, and time, vek, an expression of man's dominion over time by virtue of his God-bestowed capacity for thinking and reason, not unlike the significance of man in the Bible verse cited above. The problem with the word man is that, especially in our age, it has become so closely associated with only one half of the total number of sentient thinking beings on the planet, and that the other half, quite understandably, feels collectively excluded by the term. Russian, by contrast, does not have this problem. человек can designate either a man or a woman. In the end, partly through reason and partly through revelation, it was decided to translate человек, wherever appropriate to the context, by the term man with a capital M, in an effort to retain the association of the term with a divine, as opposed to a material, earthly origin, as well as to show the link between Anastasia's view of man, человек, and the concept of man in the first chapters of Genesis, which she freely quotes herself. So let all readers of this book be put on notice. Whenever you see man with a capital M, this includes you. Okay. End of footnote. I don't know where I left off. Even in one tiny piece of the cedar, there is more. Okay, forgive me. Only bright rays can travel into space from man on the Earth, and only beneficial rays can be reflected from space back to the Earth. Under the influence of malicious feelings, man can emit only dark rays. These dark rays cannot rise, but must fall into the depths of the Earth. Bouncing off its core, they return to the surface in the form of volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, wars, etc. The culminating achievement of these dark rays is their direct effect on the man originating them, invariably exacerbating this man's own malicious feelings. Cedars live to be 550 years old. Day and night, their millions of needles catch and store the whole spectrum of bright energy. Footnote, trees indeed capture a wide range of radiation beyond visible light. Man-made antennas are but an imitation of branching pattern in trees. Both the structure of trees and the material composing them betray natural wave receptors. Tree sap is a great conductor of electricity, and this is why a tree hit by lightning virtually explodes, and static electricity was first received from amber, a fossil resin from conifer trees. For details, please see Dr. Philip Callahan's books, including Tuning into Nature and Ancient Mysteries, Modern Visions, The Magnetic Life of Agriculture. Victor Schaberger referred to these trees as bioelectric condensers. This statement is corroborated by Dr. Georges Likovsky, a pioneer explorer of energy fields as the foundation of all life on a cellular level. During the period of the cedar's life, all the celestial bodies pass above them, reflecting this bright energy. Even in one tiny piece of a cedar, there is more energy beneficial to man than in all man-made energy installations taken together. Cedars receive the energy emanating from man through space, store it up, and at the right moment, give it back. They give it back when there is not enough of it in space. In other words, in man, or in everything living and growing on the earth. Occasionally, though very rarely, one discovers cedars that have been storing up energy but not giving back what they have stored. After 500 years of their life, they start to ring. This is how they talk to us, through their quiet ringing sound. This is how they signal people to take them and saw them up to make use of their stored up energy on the earth. This is what the cedars are asking with their ringing sound. They keep on asking for 3 whole years. If they don't have contact with living human beings, then in 3 years, deprived of the opportunity to give back what they have received and stored from space, they lose their ability to give it back directly to man. Then they will start burning up the energy internally. This torturous process of burning and dying lasts 27 years. Not long ago, we discovered a cedar like this. We determined that it had been ringing for 2 years already. It was ringing very softly. Perhaps it is trying to draw out its request over a long period of time, but still it only has about a year left. It must be sawed up and given away to people. The old man spoke at length, and for some reason I heard him out. The voice of this strange old Siberiak, the Russian word denoting a resident of Siberia, sounded at first quietly confident, then very excited, and when he got excited, he would rub the piece of cedar with his fingertips as though they were lightly tripping over some kind of musical instrument. It was cold on the riverbank. An autumn wind was blowing across the river. Gusts of wind ruffled the hair on the old man's capeless men's, but the spokesman's jacket and shirt remained unbuttoned. His fingertips kept rubbing the cedar pendant on his chest, still exposed to the wind. He was trying to explain its significance to me. Lydia Petrovna, an employee of my firm, came down the gangplank to tell me that everyone else had already... Oh my God. To tell me that everyone else was already on board and waiting for me to finish my conversation. I bade farewell to the oldsters and quickly climbed aboard. I couldn't act on their request for 2 reasons. Delaying departure, especially for 3 days, would mean a significant financial loss, and besides, everything these old fellows said seemed to me at the time to be in the realm of pure superstition. The next morning, during our company meeting, I suddenly noticed that Lydia Petrovna was fingering a cedar pendant of her own. Later, she would tell me that after I'd gone aboard, she'd stayed behind for a while. She noticed that when I started hurrying away from them, the oldster that had been talking with me stared after me with a perplexed look, and then said excitedly to his older companion, "Now how can that be? Why didn't they get it? I really don't know how to speak their language. I couldn't make them believe. I simply couldn't. Why couldn't I, Father? Tell me." The elder man put his hand on his son's shoulder and replied, "You weren't convincing enough, son. They didn't grasp it." As I was going up the gangplank, Lydia Petrovna went on, "The old man that was talking with you suddenly rushed up to me, grabbed me by the arm, and led me back down to the grass below. He hurriedly pulled out of his pocket a string, and attached to it was this piece of cedar wood. He put it around my neck and pressed it against my chest with the palm of both his hand and mine. I even felt a shiver go through my whole body. Somehow he managed to do this all very quickly, and I didn't get even a chance to say anything to him. As I was walking away, he called after me, 'Have a safe journey. Be happy. Please come again next year. All the best, people. We'll be waiting for you. Have a safe journey.' As the ship pulled away from the dock, the old fellow kept on waving at us for a long time, and then, all at once, sat down on the grass. I was watching him through a pair of binoculars. The old man that talked with you and later gave me the pendant. I saw him sit down on the grass, and his shoulders were trembling. The older one, with his long beard, was bending over him and stroking his head. Amidst the flurry of my subsequent commercial dealings, account-keeping, and end-of-voyage farewell banquets, I completely forgot about the strange Siberian oldsters. Upon my return to Novosibirsk, I was afflicted with sharp pains. The diagnosis, a duodenal intestinal ulcer and osteochondrosis of the thoracic spine. In the quiet of the comfy hospital ward, I was cut off from the bustle of everyday life. My deluxe private room gave me an opportunity to calmly reflect on my 4-month expedition and to draw up business plans for the future. But it seemed as though my memory relegated just about everything that had happened to the background, and for some reason the old men and what they had said came to the forefront of my thought. I requested to have delivered to me in the hospital all sorts of literature on cedars. After comparing what I read with what I had heard, I became more and more amazed and began to actually believe what the oldsters had said. There was at least some kind of truth in their words, or maybe the entire thing was true. In books on folk medicine, there is a lot said about the cedar as a healing remedy. They say that everything from the tips of the needles to the bark is endowed with highly effective healing properties. The Siberian cedar wood has a beautiful appearance, and artistic wood carving masters enjoy great success in using it for furniture as well as soundboards for musical instruments. Cedar needles are highly capable of decontaminating the surrounding air. Cedar wood has a distinctive, pleasant, balsam fragrance. A small cedar chip placed inside a house will keep moths away. In the popular science literature I read, it was said that the qualitative characteristics for northern cedars were significantly higher than for those growing in the south. Back in 1792, the academician P.S. Pallas, a reference to Peter Simon Pallas, 1741 to 1811, a German zoologist, paleontologist, botanist, and ethnographer born in St. Petersburg. As a member of St. Petersburg Academy of Science, he was a prominent pioneer explorer of the Siberian taiga. Back then, the academic dude Pallas wrote that the fruits of the Siberian cedar were effective in restoring youth and virility, and significantly increasing the body's ability to withstand a number of diseases. There is a whole host of historical phenomenon directly or indirectly linked to the Siberian cedar. Here is one of them. In 1907, a 50-year-old semi-literate peasant named Gregory Rasputin, sources do not agree on the date of his birth, a monk from the Tuamen region of western Siberia who appeared to have unusual healing powers. He curried favor with the court of Tsar Nicholas by demonstrating a beneficial influence on their son, the heir to the throne, Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia. The passage below is quoted from the 1797 novel At the Last Frontier by Valentin Picul. For further details, please see footnote 16 in Book 2. In 1907, the 50-year-old semi-literate peasant named Gregory Rasputin, who hailed from an isolated Siberian village in an area where their Siberian cedar grows, found himself in St. Petersburg, the capital, and soon became a regular guest of the imperial family. Not only did he amaze them with his predictions, but he possessed incredible sexual stamina. At the time of his assassination, onlookers were struck by the fact that, despite his bullet-ridden body, he continued to live. Perhaps because he had been raised on cedar nuts in a part of this country where cedars abound. This is how a contemporary journalist describes his staying power. At age 50, he could begin an orgy at noon and go on carousing until 4 o'clock in the morning. From his fornication and drunkenness, he would go directly to the church for morning prayers and stand praying until 8, before heading home for a cup of tea. Then, as if nothing had happened, he would carry on receiving visitors until 2 in the afternoon. Next, he would collect a group of ladies and accompany them to the baths. From the baths, he would be off to a restaurant in the country, where he would begin repeating the previous night's activities. No normal person could ever keep up a regime like that. The many-time world champion and Olympic champion wrestler Alexander Karelin, who has never been defeated so far, is also a Siberian, also from an area where the Siberian cedar grows. This strong man also eats cedar nuts. A coincidence? Footnote for Alexander Karelin, a Russian, European, Olympic, and world champion wrestler, many times over, undefeated in international competition from 1987 to 2000, for most of this time not even giving up a point. I mention only those facts which can be easily verified in popular science literature, or which can be confirmed by witnesses. Lydia Petrovna, who was given the ringing cedar pendant by the Siberian oldster, is now one of those witnesses. She is 36 years old, married with 2 children. Her co-workers have noticed changes in her behavior. She has become kinder and smiles more often. Her husband, whom I happen to know, told me that their family has now been experiencing a greater degree of mutual understanding. He also remarked that his wife has somehow become younger looking and is starting to arouse greater feelings in him, more respect and quite possibly more love. But all these multitudinous facts and evidences pale in comparison to the main point, which you can look up for yourself, a discovery which has left me with not a trace of doubt, and that is in the Bible. In the book of Leviticus and the Old Testament, chapter 14, verse 4, God teaches us how to treat people and even contaminate their houses with the help of the cedar. After comparing all the facts and data I had gleaned from various sources, I was confronted by such a remarkable picture that all the miracles known to the world faded before it. The great mysteries that have excited people's minds began to pale into insignificance in comparison with the mystery of the ringing cedar. Now I could no longer have any doubts about its existence. They were all dispelled by the popular science literature and the old Vedic scriptures I was reading. Cedars are mentioned 42 times in the Bible, all in the Old Testament. Footnote: in the authorized King James Version of the English Bible, in fact, the word cedar appears 75 times. When Moses presented humanity with the 10 Commandments on stone tablets, he probably knew more than had been recorded in the Old Testament. We are accustomed to the fact that in nature there are various plants capable of treating human ills. The healing properties of the cedar have been attested in popular science literature by such serious and authoritative researchers as the... I just don't... Academia shit. I just don't get that word. I'll just say academic. As the academic palace. And this is a consistent with the Old Testament scriptures. My brain feels like potato soup. I don't know how to pronounce these fucking words. And now, pay attention. When the Old Testament talks about the cedar, it is just the cedar alone. Nothing is said about the other trees. Footnote: there are, of course, separate references in the Bible to a number of trees, fir, oak, juniper, but not in conjunction with cedars. And doesn't the Old Testament say that the cedar is the most potent medicine of any existing in nature? What is this, anyway? A medicine kit? And how is it to be used? And why, of all the Siberian cedars, did these strange old fellows point to a single ringing cedar? But that's not all. Something immeasurably more mysterious lies behind this story from the Old Testament. King Solomon built a temple out of cedar wood. In return for the cedar from Lebanon, he gave another king, Hiram, 20 cities of his kingdom. Incredible. Giving away 20 cities just for some kind of building materials? True, he got something else in return. At King Solomon's request, he was given servants that were skilled in felling timber. What kind of people were these? What knowledge did they possess? I have heard that even now, in the far-flung reaches of the taiga, there are old people whose job it is to choose trees for construction. But back then, over 2,000 years ago, everybody might have known this. Nevertheless, specialists of some sort were required. The temple was built. Services began to be held there, and the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud. It has a bunch of footnotes with quoting Bible verses. If you care that much, you can just rent the book from the library. What kind of cloud was that? How and from where did it enter the temple? What could it have been? Energy? A spirit? A kind of phenomenon? And what connection did it have with the cedar? The old fellow's talking about the ringing cedar as storing up some kind of energy. Which cedars are stronger? The ones in Lebanon or Siberia? Academic Palace said, Pallas, said that the healing properties of the cedars increased in proportion to their proximity to the forest tundra. In that case, then the Siberian cedar would be the stronger. It says in the Bible, by their fruits ye shall know them. In other words, again, the Siberian cedar. Could it be that no one has paid any attention to all of this? Has no one put two and two together? The Old Testament, the science of the past century, and the current one are all of the same opinion regarding the cedar. And Elena Ivanova Rorich, footnote, a Russian religious thinker traveling through Asia with her husband, the prominent Russian artist, some fucking retardedly big word that I can't pronounce. She became fascinated with the Oriental religions and devoted her career to studying and writing about them. In 1920, she and her husband founded the Agni Yoga Society, a non-profit educational institution in New York. Ilana Rorich notes in her book, Living Ethics, a chalice of cedar resin figured in the rituals of the consecration of the kings of the ancient Khorasan. Druids also called the chalice of cedar resin the chalice of life, and only later, with the loss of the realization of the spirit, was it replaced by blood. The fire of Zoroaster was the result of the burning of the cedar resin in the chalice. Footnote, this translation is taken from an English version of the Roerich, Leaves of Moria's Garden, Book 2, Illumination. So then, how much of our forebears' knowledge of the cedar, its properties, and its uses has been passed down to the present day? Is it possible that nothing has been preserved? What do the Siberian oldsters know about it? And all at once my memory harked back to an experience of many years ago which caused a shiver to run up and down my spine. I didn't pay any attention to it, but back then, during the early years of perestroika, I was president of the Association of Siberian Entrepreneurs. One day I got a call from the Novosibirsk District Executive Council. Back then, we still had a Communist Party committees and executive councils, asking me to come to a meeting with a prominent Western businessman. He had a letter of recommendation from the government of the day. Several entrepreneurs were present, along with workers from the executive council. Secretariat. The Western businessman was of a rather imposing external appearance. An unusual person with oriental features. Oh my god. I need a break. To be continued.